I can hear you.
I'll try that again. Hello, Polina. Good evening. How are you?
I'm great, and I'm very excited about your presentation today.
Oh, thank you. I share your excitement. Hello, everybody. Thanks for tuning in. Yeah, I'll get cracking. I'll just say before I start, please feel free to interrupt or ask comments. I'll be very happy to answer them as we go along. We won't have to wait before the end, but there's quite a bit to show you. So yes, without further ado, I'll start. So we're talking about using data for effective SEO. And why should you listen to me? Well, I've been doing SEO for quite a while, a good 20 years. I've worked for a number of firms in that 20-year period of different sizes, from your mega brands like Amazon EU, global agencies, independent agencies, and also the humble startups and small businesses. I've also been featured in major industry publications, such as Search Engine Journal, and that's me. So, in terms of, these are the three major use cases, and we're going to cover three of them, being cluster keywords, forecasting search demand, and SEO split tests. Great. So, here we go. So the reason why we want to cluster keywords is because we want to highlight performance trends from data. Okay, so for example, if you were to get your data from Serpstat, you'll end up with a table with your keyword, your search volume, and your positions. So we want to go from this to this, where we can segment it into more labels, where we can actually get the summary information. Okay, so where we could group keywords by segment, so it becomes a lot more meaningful for your colleagues. And so once you've segmented it, it means you could do even more interesting things, which is to report more meaningfully, where you sort of you show these segments over time, which is great for your reporting, but it also helps you as an SEO professional to do things like forecasting and also find optimization opportunities. Okay, here we go. Can you share some practical examples of case studies where SEO split tests led to significant improvements? How did you measure the success of these tests? Okay, let's talk about that later. I don't have any case studies in this deck at the moment, but I can certainly talk through the principles of how you carry out those split tests. Cool. So today's session is really more about showing you the sort of data science techniques that help you carry out those tests in a valid manner. So in terms of data sources, in addition to Serpstat, you could cluster keyword data from Google Search Console, and it's not just keywords. You could cluster your content, which will be under the page label. So it could be page level data, and you could cluster those landing pages into different labels. It could be web analytics, and that would be landing pages. Because they're not provided, you won't get the keyword breakdown. And there's search analytics, such as Serpstat, which gives you both pages and keywords. So those would be your data sources for clustering. And there's multiple techniques. For example, you could cluster from brand to non-brand. Now, from a Python perspective, you would use the np.where function. So the basic logic goes, np-where is like an if statement. So your basic logic would be, if the query contains your brand name, then you label it as brand, else it's non-brand. If you wanted to cluster performance data by your landing page, you could go with the subdirectory, and again you would use well, actually, you would use mp.select, which is a more complex version of mp where. Think of it as a more complex if statement. So in Excel, you probably do a nested if statement, whereas here it's if page contains collections. This is like a Shopify site. Then it's a PLP. Elif, if page contains products. Then it's PDP, Elif. So as you can see, it's a far more multi-layered if statement technique. So that's another way of clustering. You could do something a bit more brute force. So using techniques such as TF-IDF, which is a natural language toolkit facility in Python. So basically what happens here is it breaks down the search strings into words, and then it removes all the common words, which we call stop words, and then it takes a frequency count. And then what you would do is use the 5 most popular words as your category labels. There's a script on how to do that in my Data Driven SEO book. Search intent is a bit more complicated to explain in a single slide, but effectively what you're doing here is you're getting the SERPs for each of your keyword, and you're going to, because each keyword will have 10 search results, for example, you will group those SERPs by keyword, and then you want to convert those rank URLs per SERP into a single field. Okay, and then you're in a position from a data perspective to compare each keyword SERP to each other, and it's the SERP similarity score by keyword that will allow you to group them according to similarity, and therefore if they're similar, then they share the same search intent. And again, the script is given. The scripts are given in my book. No doubt you can get that data from Serpstat. Okay, so just keeping an eye on the questions. For beginners diving into Python for SEO, are there specific libraries or frameworks you recommend starting with, and any particular reasons for those choices? Well, there is no SEO library as such, but if you're doing Python for SEO, your real tool, your real workhorse is going to be pandas and NumPy. So I'm just going to type this in, pandas and NumPy. So that is for data manipulation. Okay, hopefully that answers your question. Just posted it in there. With SEO Split Tests, how do you manage potential risks associated with testing changes, especially dealing with large websites with diverse content? I'm actually going to go through some of that later on. Thank you for the question. Let's go back to it. If you've got any questions on keyword clustering, do share those. We're happy to go back to them. Let's talk about forecasting, in particular search demand. So forecasting is a very popular topic. So if you've got any questions on those while I'm running through materials, don't be shy. Do post your questions. Great. So what we're trying to do here is effectively take some historical data and then see if we can forecast. Now, what I've done is I've taken historical data up to the October of 2022, and then I've deliberately seen what these two forecast models would produce. In this case, it's Profit by Facebook and Saramax. So actually, going back to my previous question, beginners diving into specific libraries or frameworks. Saramax, I'll just type it in, forecasting libraries for Python. Saramax, and I believe it's called FP Profit. Hopefully that's received. Great. So that's where we're trying to get to. There's a number of options. If you want to forecast revenue or traffic, you would use your web analytics, so Adobe or Google Analytics. And also there's Google Search Console. Saramax is the one I personally recommend. I find it's a very good model for SEO use cases. It requires less data points than, say, FB Profit, because FB Profit is a neural network based. Although you could use fewer data points for FB Profits, it won't perform as well. Saramax is also easier to understand and interpret, so it's not a black box, and it generally outperforms Profit. So Saramax is personally my go-to forecasting model when it comes to SEO science. So the first step is when you're taking your raw data, whichever data source you've chosen, effectively what you want to end up with is an aggregation where you simply have two columns, your date and say revenue or traffic, whatever that is, but we'll assume revenue for now. If you're using Saramax, you want to find the parameters, and they've got a handy function called AutoArima. And remember what I said about easy to interpret. Well, what I like about AutoArima is that it breaks down that time series into three components. That is seasonality, i.e., are there repetitive patterns in the historic data? There's the trend, is the long-term direction going up? Is it going down? Or is it going sideways? And then there's the stability, how predictable or noisy is the data? Now, running AutoArima will help you find those parameters, and then we use those parameters to feed it in the model when we're making forecasts. The next step is to fit and forecast. So you would use the Saramax function as illustrated here. You feed in your parameters, and then you use the .fit function. Once you save that into a variable, then you would use the .predict function. This is just to give you the overall principles about how it works. If you want the detail, again, it's in my book. SEO Split Tests, I see we had some questions on that earlier. Again, if you have any questions, I'm just going to scroll through to see if there's any latest questions. No, we're quite good so far. Okay. Right, let's crack on. So there was a question about risk. So the reason why we're split A/B testing is that we want to roll out site changes in the low risk manner and make sure that it's actually generalizable and it's going to produce the desired results. I'm sure you know that already. That's the motivation. So in terms of the first thing we need to do is we need to choose the outcome. Okay, so there's things you can split test. I wouldn't do revenue, but rank position is a bit more robust to seasonality. Or you can go with what most split tests are run on, which is organic search traffic. So there's a hypothesis. Okay, that's the first thing. You need to form a hypothesis, otherwise you don't really have a split test. So your hypothesis would go along the lines of X change leads to Y change in traffic. So your X change is the SEO idea that you want to implement, and your Y change is whatever the impact is in your outcome variable. Here we've assumed traffic. Okay, so you take your source data. In this case, it's going to come from your analytics, be it Looker or Adobe, whatever you're working on or your organization uses. So here, notice that there's going to be days where you don't get any traffic, but the trouble is that your analytics is not going to report it's not going to generate rows of empty data. So the one thing to bear in mind is your traffic is likely to be Poisson distributed. What does that mean? It means that there's going to be a lot of days when there isn't any data and fewer days when there is data. So it's not going to be normally distributed. It's going to be very negatively skewed, as you can see here. Hope you like my drawings. So the thing you need to do is you need to zero inflate the data, right? You need to actually create rows of data where there was no traffic. Okay, so your data frame is actually going to look like this. And this is the impact, right? So your average, if you don't zero inflate your data, your average is likely to be flattered. It's going to look like 9 visits per day, when actually with zero inflation, because you added these empty rows where there was no data per landing page, you're going to find the true average is actually 3 visits per day. So this is really important, and this is one of your risk mitigation processes to ensure you don't lead yourself to an erroneous split A/B test conclusion. Sample size. So you need to determine your sample size. Okay, there's a bunch of factors that will affect the minimum sample size you need to run. Okay, there's things like the variation around the average. So you need to estimate those parameters, because the more variation there is, that means the less consistent your data is around the average. There's a lot of, say your average is 3 visits per day. It means that for all of your landing pages, there could be a lot of zeros, and there could be some landing pages that get 10 or 100 visits per day, and that will skew the average. That's what I mean by the variation. It's the range of difference from the mean or the average in terms of average daily traffic. Then you got the effect size, and the effect size is the expected uplift from your SEO idea. Okay, so obviously the higher the effect size, the higher your sample size. And then the statistical significance. So if you're doing it to a 5% statistical significance, then that will require a lower sample size compared to, say, a 1% statistical significance, because obviously it requires a lot more samples in order to be absolutely sure that the effect is real. Your statistical power is the probability that the effect observed is actually real. I find 90% is pretty good. You could go as low as 80%. It really depends on things like your regular traffic levels. And there's other factors as well that could be extraneous, things like how easy it is to deploy, how many website pages you have, things like that. So once you've determined all of that, and you know what your minimal sample size is, you would obviously allocate, and you want to do this by random assignment of URLs to your test and control. I'm going to just refer to see if there's any questions so far. There are none. Hopefully that means that you understand everything, or if not, again, please feel free to ask questions. So obviously, once you've allocated the URLs to test and control, one of the things you could do to mitigate risk is you can double the minimum sample size, and then you run the experiment and you collect the data. Now, actually, I'll get into the test. So for Poisson distributed data, which is very typical of website visits, you would use a negative binomial model to test the difference between test and control. And what you're looking for is this number here, which is the the LLR p-value. So the LLR p-value will tell you the statistical significance, okay? So if your sample size is based on, say, a 5% significance, or even a 1% significance, anything less than, say, 0.05, if you're doing it to a 5% significance, means that you can reject the null hypothesis, i.e. your SEO idea worked. If you want the code to do any of this, it's all in my book. I disclose all of the data science techniques, and a lot of operations. What takes weeks will now take days, if not hours, and it's available on Amazon. And thank you very much.
Great, thank you, Andreas. Thank you for this insightful presentation. As I see, you covered all questions that came during your presentation. So let's wait a few minutes if people have more of them.
Cool. I just thought I'd mention, because there was a question on potential risk. The other risk I would, so obviously the sample size parameters will help you mitigate the risk of a failed or invalid SEO split test. The other thing I would recommend is the split A/B test, because then you're guarding against seasonality. If you're testing a bunch of URLs against each other, so you've got 100 URLs, you test it in November, and then you're testing to see what the difference is between November as your control and December as your test. The problem with that is seasonality will come into play. The other thing is that I see a question. I'll get into that in a minute. The other thing is that if you are running a split test, what you definitely don't want to do is make changes to both control and test, because even though you're making identical changes to both control and test, what you might find is that identical change may have an interaction with some of the URLs in the test or the control, and that could mess up the results or invalidate the test.
Great. Let me take a micro from you for a minute, and I want to highlight that to implement the knowledge that Andreas shared with us today, you can rely on Serpstat, because we offer a variety of tools and features to help both data analysis and SEO professionals optimize website for search engines. Keyword research, rank breaking, custom reports, API access, and many more. And get Serpstat all in one platform starting for $45 during the Christmas sale that ends in this month. Moreover, we can assist you in selecting the perfect pricing plan to achieve your business objectives. And now I'm ready to show our question.
Yeah. So,
well,
shall I read it out?
You mentioned multiple techniques. However, could you shed some light on how you prioritize these techniques based on the unique needs and goals of a particular website or business?
Yeah, so the techniques depend on the question, right? So, for example, in terms of reporting, I mean, I use all of these techniques, and the techniques fulfill a certain purpose. Like, for example, when it comes to reporting, I would use brand and non-brand, because a business is generally interested in how much non-brand organic search traffic is being delivered by the SEO campaign efforts. So that's an example. Brand is also useful because it kind of gives you a baseline of what the business is doing. Like, so for example, if brand search traffic increased by 10%, but your non-brand search traffic increased by more than 10%, then that shows that you're doing a really good job, right? It's not just, brand traffic could be, you're always there and about going to rank number 1 or number 2 for your own brand, hopefully number 1. So that gives you a barometer for seasonality, whereas then you can see how your non-brand traffic is performing against seasonality, for example. So hopefully that helps answer your question, Katerina.
Great, thank you, Andreas, very much. And maybe there's anybody who wants to know something more from Andreas. And today we run our presentation fast, and I guess you all need to think about it, to check, to try, to view through analytics. And so follow Andreas on social media, because his social media is he's very active there, and he shares insightful things. I don't really good on data, but I'm sure you find it helpful. And don't forget that in 2 weeks we'll meet again with our next upcoming webinar, and you can learn about AI-driven content briefs faster, easier, and better. As I see our visitors today thanking you, Andreas, and I'm thanking you too for being with us today.
Well, thank you. Thank you for having me.
Follow Serpstat on social media, and have a great day and week, everybody.
Thanks, everyone. Reach out to me on LinkedIn if you've got any further questions as well. Happy to answer them. Cheers.